The entire banquet hall went silent. Kang Min-suk, heir to the most powerful syndicate in Seoul, had just watched his mother stop breathing, all because of the tuck, all because no one moved fast enough. Except her, except Nancy, the black maid everyone overlooked, everyone dismissed, everyone treated like furniture until she dropped that silver tea tray and spoke in a Gyeonggi dialect so ancient, so raw, it yanked the elders back to their childhood villages. They thought she was nothing. They thought she was invisible. They had no idea what she really was. The Kang estate's crystal chandeliers might as well have been spotlights on a stage of lies. Silk handbox and Italian leather shoes couldn't hide what this family truly was. Traffickers, extortionists, architects of disappeared children. The Kang Syndicate didn't build their empire on honor, they built it on stolen lives. And now, the matriarch, old but still sharp as a blade, was celebrating her 70th birthday surrounded by guests who feared her more than they loved her. The air thick with expensive incense and heavier secrets. Nancy Harbert knew the weight of secrets. At 27, she'd spent a lifetime being invisible, too black for Korea, too foreign for trust, a woman caught between identities, belonging fully to neither. The head housekeeper Kim had given strict instructions: be invisible, be silent, be nothing. Just another black face in a maid uniform, just another servant to be ignored. Keep your head down, don't make eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to. The irony wasn't lost on her. These were the same rules her foster father, the Gukbop restaurant owner in Ujeongbu, had taught her when she was 6 years old, fresh from abandonment at a military base. The same rules for survival in a country that didn't claim her. The staff briefing that morning had been a masterclass in terror. Head housekeeper Kim had clutched her clipboard like a shield as she addressed the service team. The matriarch's 70th birthday is not a celebration. It is a test. The Kang family doesn't host parties. They stage power displays. One mistake, one moment of impropriety, and your termination will be the least of your concerns. Am I understood? Nancy had stood at the back, silent, watching, always watching. The other maids avoided her gaze. The Korean staff especially kept their distance. The black woman who cleaned too well, moved too quietly, made them uneasy. She was an anomaly they couldn't categorize, couldn't understand. Their whispers followed her through the servant corridors. Why does she never ask for help? Why does she understand everything we say? Why does she smile like she knows something we don't? The matriarch's arrival transformed the estate into a war zone disguised as elegance. Security men with earpieces and barely concealed weapons positioned themselves at every entrance. The traditional musicians tuned their instruments. Bodyguards outnumbered guests 3-1. Nancy moved through the preparations like smoke, arranging chrysanthemums, folding napkins into cranes, ensuring every detail was flawless. Her hands didn't shake. They never shook anymore. Not since she'd accepted this assignment 6 months ago, not since she'd learned the ledger existed, the one that documented every child the Kang family had made disappear. She was assigned to tea service, far from the head table, away from scrutiny, away from recognition. Head housekeeper Kim had made sure of that. You stay in the back, secondary serving only. If the family notices you, if they remember your face. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. A dropped serving spoon, a last-minute request for the matriarch's special jujube tea, and suddenly Nancy was weaving through the banquet hall, silver tray balanced perfectly, head bowed, praying to remain a ghost. She approached the head table just as the matriarch reached for another piece of tuck. Time fractured into jagged pieces. The elderly woman's hand froze midair. Her face shifted from composed to panicked. The rice cake lodged in her throat. Her eyes went wide. Kang Min-suk rose from his chair, his designer suit suddenly too tight, his voice sharp. "Mother." But the bodyguards didn't move fast enough. The family doctor was 3 tables away. The seconds stretched like hours. Nancy didn't think, couldn't think. 25 years of training, linguistic, tactical, survival, compressed into pure instinct. She dropped the tea tray. The crash echoed like gunfire. She was already moving, already behind the matriarch, already executing the maneuver with precision that belonged nowhere near a clumsy foreign maid. The rice cake dislodged. The matriarch gasped, coughed, breathed. And then Nancy's mouth betrayed her. "Grandmother, you've got to chew slow or the mountain spirits will catch ya." The words came out exactly as her foster father used to say them, rough, warm, thick with the Gyeonggi accent of farmers and market vendors and people who'd never left their villages, the kind of dialect that hadn't been spoken in Seoul's elite circles in decades, the kind of dialect that didn't belong in a black woman's mouth. The silence that followed was absolute. Every elder at the head table turned to stone. Chopsticks hung suspended in midair. Conversations died on lips. Even the traditional musicians missed their cues. Kang Min-syuk's eyes locked onto Nancy with the intensity of a predator recognizing prey that just revealed fangs. The matriarch, still catching her breath, stared at Nancy with an expression that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Not gratitude, not confusion, recognition. And Nancy knew in that crystallized moment of exposure that everything was about to change. The ledger, the mission, her carefully constructed invisibility, all of it hung in the balance of that one reflexive phrase. She'd just spoken the language of ghosts in front of the people who created them. Welcome to Afro Soul Storybook. And darling, you just crossed a threshold you can't uncross. This isn't some fairy tale romance where the prince saves the princess. This is blood and power wrapped in Armani suits. This is a legacy stolen and a woman ready to burn the world to take it back. Subscribe to watch more of our daily stories and comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far this storm is spreading, and hit that like button. The morning before the banquet, Nancy had moved through the Kang estate like water through cracks, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. The family's private study sat on the 3rd floor, west wing, behind a door that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan, security measures that would stop most people. Nancy wasn't most people. She'd timed her approach to coincide with a security shift change at 6:47 a.m. The guards rotated every 12 hours, and there was always a 7-minute gap when the outgoing team briefed the incoming team in the East Corridor. 7 minutes when the cameras looped their footage. 7 minutes of pure vulnerability in a fortress that believed itself impenetrable. The keycard had been simple, a quick clone during last week's laundry run when Section Chief Park left his jacket hanging in the staff room. The fingerprint required more creativity. A drinking glass, carefully retrieved from the chief's desk, treated with graphene powder, transferred to a gelatin mold. Technology so simple it was almost insulting. The door clicked open at 6:49 a.m. The study smelled like leather and old money. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with first editions Nancy suspected no one had actually read. The 4th wall was glass, offering a view of Seoul that reminded everyone who entered exactly how high the Kang family stood above the ordinary world. Nancy's hands moved with practiced efficiency. The listening device was smaller than a shirt button, magnetically attached to the underside of the desk's center drawer. The second bug went behind the antique clock on the mantel, the kind of decorative piece that existed to be ignored. The third, most critical placement adhered to the spine of a leather-bound ledger tucked between tax documents on the second shelf. She was reaching for the 4th device when footsteps echoed in the corridor. Nancy's pulse didn't spike. That was the difference between panic and training. She simply moved, melting into the narrow space between the bookshelf and the wall, her black uniform blending with the shadows. The door opened. Kang Min-suk entered, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and irritated. I don't care what Uncle says. The shipyard numbers don't add up. 3 containers went to Pyeongtaek that aren't on any manifest. Nancy held her breath. Not from fear, from focus. Every word was gold. No, don't tell him I'm asking. Just find out what's in those containers. He ended the call, stood there for a moment, staring at his father's desk, then left as abruptly as he'd entered. The door clicked shut. Nancy waited a full 3 minutes before emerging. The 4th bug went behind the picture frame of the late Chairman Kang, the family's founder, the man whose empire was built on bones no one dared to count. She was back in the servant corridor by 7:02 a.m., pushing a cleaning cart, just another invisible body preparing for the day's performance. The banquet unfolded exactly as choreographed until it didn't. Nancy had served tea to 12 tables without incident, her posture deliberately submissive, her eyes trained downward, her movements mechanical. The perfect servant, the perfect ghost. Then the matriarch's face changed color, and instinct overrode everything. The aftermath of saving her life, of speaking in that damning dialect, stretched out like a held breath. Nancy remained frozen in place, her hands still positioned from the Heimlich maneuver, her mind racing through exit strategies that no longer existed. The matriarch touched her throat gently, then looked at Nancy with eyes that held too many questions. "Where?" The old woman's voice was rough. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Before Nancy could construct an answer, Kang Min-sok was already moving. His hand closed around Nancy's upper arm, not bruising, but absolute. The wine cellar. Now. It wasn't a request. The wine cellar was everything an interrogation room pretended not to be. Beautiful brick archways, temperature-controlled perfection, bottles worth more than most people's houses, and absolutely no witnesses. Min-sok released her arm but positioned himself between Nancy and the only exit. His expression had shifted from suspicion to something more dangerous, focused interest. "Who are you?" Nancy kept her head down, playing the role even now. "I'm just a maid, sir. I don't." "Don't." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't insult both of us. That dialect you spoke, my grandmother hasn't heard it in 40 years. It's the language of Gyeonggi Do farmers, of people who grew up with dirt under their fingernails and mountain spirits in their stories. It's not something you learn from a textbook." He stepped closer. Nancy could smell his cologne. Expensive, understated, the scent of power worn lightly. "So I'll ask again. Who are you?" Nancy made a decision. Not the truth, not yet, but a version of it that might buy her time. She lifted her head, met his eyes directly for the first time. The shift in her posture was subtle but unmistakable, the submissive maid dissolving to reveal something harder underneath. "My name is Nancy Harbert," she said in perfect, unaccented English. "I was abandoned at a military base in Uijeongbu when I was an infant. A restaurant owner found me, raised me, taught me everything he knew, including how to speak like people who don't trust outsiders." Min-sok's eyes narrowed. "Why are you here, in my family's house?" "I'm looking for something." "The ledger." Nancy's carefully controlled expression slipped for half a second, enough for him to see the confirmation. "You know about it," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "which means you know what my family has done, which means you're either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both," said Nancy, "but those children deserve more than to be forgotten in your family's accounting books." Something flickered across Min-sok's face, not anger, but something more complicated. Pain, perhaps, or shame. "You think I don't know what's happening in my own house?" His voice was bitter. "You think I haven't been trying to find that ledger myself?" Nancy's breath caught. "What?" "My father built this empire on legitimate business. It was my uncle." He stopped, visibly composing himself. 3 years ago, containers started moving through our shipping company, containers that don't appear on official manifests. I've been trying to prove it, trying to find evidence, but my uncle is careful. The ledger is the only thing that could expose him." Nancy studied his face, searching for deception, finding only exhaustion. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," Min-sok said quietly, "you just saved my mother's life using skills no maid should have, and I just admitted to you that my own family is trafficking children. We're both in this now. We either work together or we both lose everything." Nancy's past was a wound that had never properly healed. She told him the essential pieces in the wine cellar, her voice steady even as she excavated memories she usually kept buried. "The restaurant owner who raised me, Mr. Cho, he wasn't just kind, he was deliberate. He taught me Korean like he was his own granddaughter, made sure I could speak the old dialects, the ones that mark you as genuine. He wanted me to belong." She paused, remembering hands rough from kitchen work carefully showing her how to hold chopsticks, how to bow properly, how to speak without an accent. "When I was 16, I found out why. He'd known about the traffickers for years. He'd seen children disappear from the base town, always the ones no one would miss. Orphans, mixed-race kids, the forgotten ones. He was compiling evidence, trying to build a case." "What happened to him?" Minseok asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "House fire. Gas leak," the official said. "Accidental. Except Mr. Cho was the most careful man I ever knew. He checked the stove 3 times before bed every night. That fire was murder, and everyone knew it, and no one did anything." "So you became an investigator." "I became a hunter," said Nancy. "I trained, studied, learned everything I needed to make myself useful to organizations that track human trafficking. And then I spent 2 years working my way into position to be hired by your family's household staff." Minseok leaned against the wine rack, processing. "The bugs. You've been recording us. Your uncle, specifically, and his associates. What have you learned?" "That the ledger exists, that it's moved 3 times in the last 6 months, and that your uncle is planning something big, another shipment leaving from Pyeongtaek in 2 weeks. Before Minseok could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. "My mother. Someone just tried to enter her quarters. Security is responding now." They moved in unison, all pretense of interrogation abandoned. The matriarch's private hallway was chaos disguised as controlled response. Security personnel crowded the corridor, weapons drawn, shouting into radios. Nancy and Minseok pushed through the crowd. "What happened?" demanded Minseok. "Someone bypassed the door lock," security chief explained. "The matriarch is unharmed, but—" A scream cut through his words. Nancy didn't think. She grabbed the tea tray from an abandoned service cart and the ceremonial whisk from beside it, the heavy bamboo kind used for traditional tea preparation, more weapon than tool in the right hands. She was through the door before security could stop her. The matriarch's sitting room was elegant even in violation, silk cushions, paper screens, a low table set with delicate porcelain. A man in black stood over the elderly woman, knife glinting his hand. He turned as Nancy entered, his expression shifting from focus to confusion. A black maid, not a threat. His mistake. Nancy threw the tea tray like a discus. It caught him across the temple, not enough to incapacitate, but enough to stagger him. She followed with the whisk, using it like a short staff, striking at pressure points with precision Mr. Cho had drilled into her during late-night training sessions above the restaurant. Solar plexus, knee, wrist. The knife clattered to the floor. The assassin recovered faster than she expected, coming at her with trained brutality. But Nancy had spent years learning to fight opponents bigger and stronger. She used his momentum against him, redirected his strikes, turned the elegant room into an obstacle course that favored speed over strength. The whisk connected with his jaw. He went down hard. Security poured in seconds later, securing the unconscious assassin. Minseok rushed to his mother, who sat perfectly composed despite the violence that had just erupted 3 feet from her chair. The matriarch's eyes, however, were fixed on Nancy, on the way she held the whisk, the way she breathed through combat adrenaline, the way she moved like someone who'd been trained by people who understood violence intimately. "You," the old woman said softly in that ancient Gyeonggi dialect, "you fight like someone who learned from a soldier. Not just any soldier, someone who survived the DMZ patrols in the 80s. Nancy's hands stilled. Mr. Cho had never told her about his military service. "And that restaurant owner who raised you?" the matriarch continued, her voice heavy with something that might have been grief. "He wasn't just kind. He was following orders. My orders." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. 25 years ago, the matriarch said, meeting Nancy's eyes directly, I left a baby girl at that military base, not to abandon her, to save her from a family purge that would have killed her before she turned 2. I paid a man I trusted, an old soldier who ran a restaurant, to raise her as his own, to keep her hidden, to keep her alive. Nancy's carefully constructed walls cracked. No! Yes! The matriarch rose, moved toward her with slow deliberation. You have your grandfather's eyes, the chairman's eyes, and now you've come back to destroy what's poisoning his legacy, as you should. Min Seok stood frozen, processing implications that rewrote everything he understood about his family. The matriarch reached out, touched Nancy's face with fingers that trembled slightly. Welcome home, granddaughter. Now let's finish what you started. The explanation hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Nancy stood paralyzed, processing information that rewrote her entire existence. The matriarch, her grandmother, watched her with eyes that had carried this secret for 25 years. Min Seok broke the silence first. Uncle Dae-jung. His voice was flat, deadly. He ordered the family purge. He's the one who's been running the trafficking operation. He tried to kill you tonight, Mother, because Nancy's investigation is getting too close. The matriarch nodded slowly. Your uncle has always been ambitious. When your grandfather died, Dae-jung believed the company should have been his. Instead, it went to your father. The resentment festered. And when your father passed 3 years ago, Dae-jung saw an opportunity to build his own empire within hours. Nancy's hands were still shaking from combat adrenaline or emotional overload. She couldn't tell. The ledger. Where is it? Hidden, the matriarch replied, but I know someone who can tell us. Dae-jung's accountant, a man who owes me a very old debt. Min Seok moved to the window, his jaw tight. If we move against Uncle openly, he'll destroy the evidence and disappear. We need proof that will hold up in court, not just family accusations. Nancy's training reasserted itself, pushing emotion aside to focus on strategy. The bugs I planted, they've recorded enough conversations to establish pattern and intent. Combined with the accountant's testimony and the physical ledger, we'd have a case. We'd have a war, Min Seok corrected. My uncle has loyalists throughout the organization, security personnel, shipping managers, even some of the household staff. The moment he realizes we're moving against him. Then we don't let him realize, Nancy interrupted. We become ghosts. We gather everything we need before he knows we're hunting. The matriarch smiled, an expression both proud and sad. You truly are your grandfather's blood. He would have said exactly that. The partnership formed in that moment was built on broken trust and shared purpose. Nancy and Min Seok spent the next 3 days moving through the estate like phantoms, coordinating through encrypted messages, never meeting openly, maintaining the fiction that Nancy was still just a maid and Min Seok still just a grieving heir, focused on legitimate business. The bugs Nancy had planted provided a roadmap. Uncle Dae-jung was careful, but arrogance made him sloppy in private. His conversations with his security chief revealed locations, schedules, weaknesses. A gambling den in rural Gyeonggi province where his enforcers gathered, a warehouse near Pyeongtaek where shipments were staged, and most importantly, a safe house where the accountant was being kept, insurance against potential betrayal. Nancy listened to hours of recordings, building a profile of men who believed themselves untouchable. They spoke in the old dialects too, the rough language of Korea's countryside, assuming no one important would understand. They had no idea those dialects were Nancy's native tongue. On the 4th night, Nancy stood in Min Seok's private office, the first time she'd entered openly rather than as service staff. He'd poured 2 glasses of whiskey, though neither of them had touched the alcohol. The gambling den, Min Seok said, studying a map spread across his desk. That's where his inner circle meets every Friday. 6 men, all former military or gang affiliated. They're the ones who handled the actual trafficking, procurement, transport, disposal. Nancy's stomach turned at that last word, but her voice remained steady. "I can get inside. They won't recognize me, and my dialect is authentic enough to pass inspection. It's too dangerous." "Everything about this is dangerous," Nancy replied, "but I'm the only one who can walk into that room and be invisible. They're looking for investigators, federal agents, threats from outside. They're not looking for a local girl who speaks like their mother's." Min-suk met her eyes. "If they realize who you are." "They won't, because I've spent my entire life being underestimated." The gambling den occupied the second floor of a building that pretended to be an agricultural supply store. Nancy approached it on Friday night wearing clothes she'd borrowed from one of the estate's junior staff. Worn jeans, a faded jacket, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no refinement, nothing that suggested soul or education or danger. She became someone else entirely. A rural girl whose father worked the fields, whose mother sold kimchi at the market, whose entire world existed within a 30-kilometer radius. The transformation was so complete that when she caught her reflection in a window, she barely recognized herself. The stairs to the second floor were narrow and dark. Cigarette smoke drifted down, carried by voices speaking in the thick Gyeonggi accent Nancy knew better than any other language. She pushed open the door like she'd done it 100 times before. 6 men sat around a low table covered with cards, cash, and soju bottles. They looked up as she entered, faces hardened by violence, eyes that cataloged threats automatically. Nancy didn't hesitate. She bowed slightly, spoke in a dialect so authentic it could have been recorded 50 years ago. "Sorry to interrupt, uncles. My father sent me to fetch Uncle Sung-ho. Says the truck delivery came in wrong again." The men relaxed immediately. Just a local girl on an errand. Not worth attention. Uncle Sung-ho, one of Dae-jung's lieutenants, grunted in irritation. "What now?" "Something about the container numbers not matching the paperwork," Nancy said, playing confused. "You know how my father is about records, worries himself sick over every detail." Sung-ho stood, clearly annoyed but not suspicious. "Wait downstairs. I'll be down in a minute." Nancy bowed again and retreated, but not before her eyes had swept the room, cataloging faces, noting the conversation she'd interrupted, something about a shipment schedule and Pyeongtaek's harbor master being handled. She waited in the dark stairwell, phone in hand, photographing Sung-ho when he descended. The flash was off, the sound muted, but she captured his face perfectly, evidence that placed him at this location at this time. He pushed past her without a second glance. Nancy waited 5 more minutes, then slipped back upstairs. The door was still ajar. The men were drinking now, guards down, speaking freely. Dae-jung wants the next shipment moved up, says the nephew is asking too many questions. The nephew doesn't have the balls to move against his own uncle. Maybe, but that maid at the estate, the black one, she's been snooping. Dae-jung thinks she might be more than she seems. Nancy's pulse quickened, but her remained motionless in the shadows. "So handle her." "We tried. She's got training. Took down Jin-woo like he was nothing. Then we do it different. Make it look like an accident. Gas leak, maybe. Worked before." Nancy's jaw clenched. They were talking about Mr. Cho, confirming what she'd always known but could never prove. She recorded another 3 minutes, capturing names, dates, locations. Then she descended the stairs and disappeared into the night, carrying evidence that would destroy them all. Nancy stood before him, no longer invisible, no longer a maid. "For Mr. Cho, for every child in that ledger, for every family you destroyed." She held up her phone, showing him the video she'd recorded. His own men, in their own words, describing operations, confessing to murders, detailing the infrastructure he'd built within his brother's company. "You're finished," Min-suk said, his voice carrying the weight of family betrayal and righteous anger. Dae-jung's face cycled through denial, rage, and finally resignation. The agents moved in, securing him, reading rights that meant nothing to a man who'd operated above law for so long. The aftermath took weeks. Arrests, testimonies, a media storm that exposed the trafficking ring while somehow protecting the Kang family's legitimate operations, largely due to the matriarch's careful negotiations and Min-sok's cooperation with authorities. Nancy stood in the estate's garden 6 weeks later, watching Seoul's lights glitter in the distance. The matriarch joined her, moving slowly but steadily. "The board voted today," the old woman said. "Min-sok is now chairman, and they've created a new position, Director of Family Ethics and Oversight. They want you to fill it." Nancy turned, surprised. "I'm an investigator, not a corporate executive." "You're my granddaughter. You're a bridge between the world that raised you and the blood you carry. You speak the languages of both the powerful and the forgotten. That makes you exactly what this family needs to rebuild trust." "And if I say no?" The matriarch smiled. "Then you say no. You've spent your life being told what you should be. I won't add to that burden." Nancy looked back at the city, thinking of Mr. Cho, of children who'd been lost and families who'd been broken. "If I take this position, I do it my way. Real oversight, real accountability. The moment the family slides back toward darkness, I burn it down myself. I would expect nothing less." Min-sok appeared from the house, 2 cups of tea in hand. He offered one to Nancy, a gesture that felt both formal and familial. The prosecution called. Uncle Daejung took a plea deal. Life sentence, no possibility of parole. His men are all facing similar terms. "And the children?" Nancy asked. "The ones we identified in the ledger?" 14 have been located and returned to families. 8 more are still being searched for. The task force thinks they'll find most of them. Most. Not all. It would never be all, but it was more than anyone had achieved before. "I'm staying," Nancy said, making the decision as she spoke the words. But not as a maid, not as just a Kang, as the voice of the family. Someone who remembers what it's like to be invisible, to be forgotten, to be left behind. The matriarch touched her shoulder gently. "Your grandfather would be proud, and Mr. Cho would be prouder still." Nancy sipped her tea, tasting the subtle bitterness and sweetness together, balanced perfectly. She thought of 2 identities, Nancy Harbert and Kang Nancy, finally merged into one complete person. A woman who could speak the dialect of rural farmers and the language of corporate power. Someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. The estate that had been her infiltration target was now her home. The family she'd come to expose was now her responsibility to rebuild, and the invisibility she'd weaponized for so long would be transformed into visibility with purpose. She was no longer a ghost hunting in shadows. She was the bridge between light and dark, between past and future, between the girl abandoned at a military base and the woman who would ensure no child was abandoned again. "To new beginnings," Min-sok said, raising his teacup. Nancy raised hers in response, catching her reflection in the darkened window, no longer a maid's uniform, but clothing that was neither traditionally Korean nor Western, a fusion that represented exactly who she'd become. They drank together as Seoul sparkled below, a city of millions, where 3 people were quietly rewriting what family meant, what power required, and what justice could look like when the forgotten finally found their voice.